biting wind of late November whipped across the flat, open fields of Mahaska County, Iowa, rattling the loose panes of glass in the old farmhouse. Elias Smurl stood on the porch, a man hardened by years of tilling unforgiving soil and wrestling with unpredictable weather. His shoulders, broad and permanently stooped, carried the weight of providing for his family, a duty he took with grim, quiet determination. He was 42, but the lines around his eyes suggested a man far older. Beside him, Martha Smurl, his wife, a woman whose spirit was as resilient as the prairie grass, hugged her shawl tighter. She studied the house, a two-story, unpainted relic of a previous generation, set too far back from the dusty, snow-dusted road. It had been vacant for 5 years, purchased at a fraction of its value, a necessary economy for a family of their size. "It's sound, Elias," she said, her voice a low, steady rumble that always calmed him. "A little dust and drafts won't hurt us." Their 2 children, Abigail, 16, and Thomas, 10, were already inside, their muffled laughter echoing from what was clearly the kitchen, investigating the cold hearth. Elias took a deep breath of the air, thick with the scent of dried wood, old plaster, and an underlying faint aroma he couldn't place. Maybe just mildew, maybe something older. "It's just the silence, Martha," Elias admitted, rubbing his calloused hands together. "It's too quiet out here. Back in Oskaloosa, you always had the sounds of the trolleys or the mill. Here, it just swallows the sound. It's peace, Elias. We earned it." They stepped inside. The first few days were a blur of unpacking crates, scrubbing soot from the walls, and laying down the worn but meticulously clean rugs Martha had inherited. The house was undeniably large, and the rooms, though sparse, had tall ceilings that made the gas lamps feel inadequate. The strange occurrences began not with a bang, but with a persistent, low-grade discomfort. It started with Thomas, the sensitive, wide-eyed boy. "Pa," he asked one afternoon, his chin barely clearing the edge of the kitchen table, "did we bring the parlor clock?" "No, son. That old thing broke months ago." "Why?" "I keep hearing it tick from the cellar." Elias dismissed it, explaining that the old pipes in the walls could make all sorts of confounding noises as they cooled and warmed. But later that night, as Elias read the farm accounts by the stove, he heard it too, a faint metallic tick, 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 coming from the basement below the floorboards. When he went down, lantern in hand, the cellar was utterly empty, save for a few cobwebbed potato sacks. The ticking stopped the moment his boot hit the dirt floor. Then came the issue with the heat. Iowa winters were brutal, and Elias prided himself on keeping the house warm. But no matter how much cordwood he stacked into the furnace, the back rooms, the parlor, and the upstairs master bedroom remained perpetually uncomfortably cold. It was a dense, inert chill that seemed to resist heat, not drafty, but utterly dead. Martha took to sleeping in Abigail's room just to be comfortable. Abigail, an intelligent girl on the cusp of womanhood, started experiencing the most perplexing issue: misplaced objects. A favorite silver locket, always kept in a small carved box on her dresser, would inexplicably turn up on a dusty windowsill in the attic. Her heavy schoolbooks, left neatly stacked on the dining table, would be found scattered across the kitchen floor, pages slightly bent. "It must be the mice, Pa," she suggested one morning, trying to sound logical, but her eyes held a spark of confusion. Elias inspected the house meticulously. There was no sign of vermin, no way for the windows to be opened from the outside, and all exterior doors were locked tight every night. He was a practical man. He needed a practical explanation. The idea of simple forgetfulness was the easiest, yet it felt wrong. Martha never forgot. Abigail rarely did. The strain of the unexplained cold and the quiet, persistent disruptions began to fray the edges of their calm. Elias found himself snapping at Martha over trivial things, and Martha started spending long afternoons staring out the window, a worried crease forming between her brows. One evening, Thomas burst into the kitchen, truly frightened for the first time. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. "It was the mirror, Ma. In the downstairs hall, I saw a shadow move." Elias rushed to the hallway, but the glass reflected only the faint flickering light of the gas lamp and his own stern, questioning face. "What kind of shadow, son? A cloud passing outside?" "No. It was tall, like a person, but not solid. It moved too fast. When I turned to look, it was gone, but the mirror was still shaking." Elias checked the mirror, bolted firmly to the wall. It was solid. He told Thomas it was a trick of the light, the flickering gas, a sleepy imagination. He gave him a cup of warm milk and sent him to bed. But as he stood there, his mind, usually focused on crops and debts, drifted. He had always scoffed at the whispers of neighbors about haunted properties, dismissing them as the silly talk of bored minds. But there was something wrong with this house. Something subtle, something that preyed on exhaustion and logic. The next week, while clearing out the old pantry, Elias found a hidden recess behind a loose section of paneling. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. It was written in a hurried, looping script, dated from the 1880s, the time of the previous family. Elias sat down, the silence of the house pressing in on him, and opened it to a random entry. October 14th. "The chill is unbearable tonight. Mary won't sleep in her room. Says the whispering is starting again. I tried to tell her it's just the wind, but I heard it this time, not the wind." It sounded like an argument, but the house is empty, but us. "This is becoming too much. We must call upon help. We must try the séance." Elias's hands trembled. He read the word again. Séance. A chill that had nothing to do with the Iowa winter crawled up his spine. The practical man in him screamed coincidence, but the anxious father heard the fear in the previous occupant's voice, a fear that mirrored his own growing unease. He immediately hid the journal, not wanting Martha to see it, convinced that the house's persistent psychological assaults could be broken only by understanding what the previous residents had done. He had to know what they had called for. In the depths of the Iowa winter, Elias Smurl, driven by a desire to bring warmth and peace back to his home, made a decision born of rational desperation. He would seek out an explanation for the house's peculiar behavior. He knew exactly where to go, having seen the advertisement in the city paper for a spiritualist gathering held in the nearby town of Knoxville. He just needed to know if the house was simply old and cold, or if there was something about its history, a past event, a human conflict that was manifesting in the present, driving a wedge into the stability of his family. He intended to find the facts, using the language of the previous occupants, the language of the séance, to unlock the secret. As Elias closed his eyes, gripping the old worn journal, the faintest sound of a distant, slow ticking returned. It was louder this time, not from the cellar but from the unheated parlor. He did not move to investigate. He simply waited for the dawn. If you're intrigued by the mystery brewing in the Smurl family home, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss Chapter 2, where Elias takes the first terrifying step into the world of the séance, hoping for answers, but finding only more questions. The journey to Knoxville was long and cold, the carriage wheels crunching over the frozen mud ruts. Elias hadn't told Martha the whole truth, just that he was meeting a property agent regarding an old deed clarification. He carried the hidden journal tucked inside his coat, its dry leather rubbing against his chest like an unwanted secret. Knoxville was a bustling town, a sharp contrast to the stark solitude of the Smurl farm. The meeting was held not in a grand hall, but in the back room of a surprisingly ordinary milliner's shop, its window displaying an array of straw hats that felt jarringly cheerful. The room was stuffy, smelling of kerosene and too many unwashed wool coats. About a dozen people were gathered, mostly women. their faces a mixture of desperation and fervent belief. Elias felt profoundly out of place, his farmer's hands rough and clumsy against the smooth wooden table. He was there for information, not faith. The woman at the head of the table was Madame Vera. She was not the ethereal figure Elias had half expected, but a plump, sharp-eyed woman in a dark velvet dress, her hair pinned back in an immaculate bun. She exuded an air of weary professionalism, like a doctor tending to a persistent ailment. "We are here to connect with those whose voices have been silenced by the veil," Madame Vera announced, her voice strong and theatrical. "Is there a specific burden tonight? A question of loss or a haunting of the mind?" Elias waited until the initial fervor had passed, watching as one woman wept over a lost daughter and another sought advice on a bad investment. Finally he spoke, his voice dry and strained. "I need information, ma'am, about a house. The one on the old Hendershot property in Mahaska County." Madame Vera paused, her sharp eyes fixing on Elias. "We are not a historical society, sir. We speak to the spirits of the past, not their leases." "The previous occupants," Elias insisted, leaning forward. "The Hendershots. I found a journal that mentioned a séance. They were deeply troubled by the house, by its silence and its cold." The word séance caused a ripple of interest in the room. Madame Vera held up a hand for silence, her attention now fully on Elias. "The Hendershots," she murmured, tapping a finger on the table. "A tragic case. Yes, I remember. They reached out to a medium, not myself, some years ago. They believed their internal family strife was being caused by the house itself." "Internal strife?" Elias echoed. The journal had only mentioned arguments and fear. "The Hendershot family was divided by a long-running, bitter financial dispute over a misplaced will," she explained, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The father, Mr. Harlan Hendershot, was wealthy, but paranoid. He hid his will, and after his death, his surviving son and daughter-in-law tore the house apart looking for it. They began to suspect each other of hiding it, or worse. The atmosphere in that house, sir, was saturated with suspicion and accusation." Elias felt a cold clutch in his stomach. Suspicion, accusation. That's what was now growing between him and Martha. And the medium they hired, what did she tell them? Madame Vera shook her head slowly. That medium only confirmed their fears. She told them the spirit in the house was a tormented, angry entity that fed on their distrust. It only made them worse. The Hendershots vanished a few weeks after that final séance, simply abandoned the property, leaving everything behind. "Vanished?" Elias frowned, pulling the journal from his coat. "The journal stops abruptly. It doesn't mention leaving, only the need for help." "They disappeared, sir. Some say they fled the state in fear, leaving the will problem unsolved. Others," she glanced around the room, "believe the house consumed them." Elias stood up abruptly. The practical man was fighting the chilling implications of the story. The house was cold because it was old. The objects were misplaced because of mice. The fear was rising because the children were lonely. "Thank you, madame," Elias said, placing a $5 bill on the table, a significant sum for him. "I apologize for the disruption." As he turned to leave, Madame Vera's voice stopped him, softer now, stripped of its theater. "Mr. Smurl, I am a skeptic in my own way. Spirits often reflect the living. If that house is haunted, it is by the residue of the living's greed and paranoia. If you bring more suspicion into that home, you will give that residue power." "What do you suggest?" Elias asked, genuinely unnerved. "Do not try to communicate with the house. Communicate with your family. Find the real source of the Hendershots' conflict. They didn't vanish because of a ghost, sir. They vanished because they drove each other away, or one did something to the other over the hidden will." Elias left the milliner's shop. The biting cold of the Iowa afternoon suddenly less chilling than the suspicion Madame Vera had placed in his mind. The house was not haunted. It was a tomb of human paranoia. The cold, the whispers, the fear. It was all a residual echo of the Hendershots' battle over money. He now had two tasks. First, he had to tell Martha the truth about the journal and his trip. Second, he had to start searching the house not for a ghost, but for a hidden document, Harlan Hendershot's lost will. If he found it, he could solve the mystery, settle the spirit of the house, and restore peace. When Elias returned, the sky was already darkening into a deep, bruised purple. He found Martha in the kitchen, not cooking, but sitting by the table staring at a small, irregular scratch mark etched deeply into the wood. "Elias," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I found this. It wasn't here this morning. It looks like someone dragged a sharp tool across the wood. I thought you said you were going to the agent's office. You smell faintly of coal oil and dust. Where were you?" The conversation he had planned, the careful, truthful confession, died in his throat. The paranoia from the Hendershot story, the warning from Madame Vera flooded his senses. If he told Martha he was looking for a will, she might instantly suspect him of wanting the property's value, or worse, hiding something else. He saw the doubt in her eyes. "The agent had me drive out to the old mill to check the boundaries." Elias lied, the words tasting like ash. "It was empty, Martha. Just dust." The lie was small, but the wedge was placed. Martha simply nodded, but her gaze was distant. Elias walked over to the kitchen cupboard, pulling out his heavy farm axe, ostensibly to split kindling. As he examined the heavy head of the axe, a dark thought, a completely rational one given the history of the house, formed in his mind. If the house contained the residue of a human conflict over a will, then perhaps one of the Hendershots killed the other and hid the evidence before they both vanished. And if the house was driving the living to suspicion, what was to stop him from doing something desperate? He replaced the axe, his hands shaking slightly, and walked to the parlor. He ran his hand over the mantelpiece, feeling the deep, unnatural cold that permeated the wood. He was not looking for a ghost. He was looking for a hidden compartment. The ticking sound, faint but insistent, began again, coming from behind the sealed wall near the fireplace. Elias couldn't sleep. The lie he told Martha felt heavier than the winter air, and the memory of the ticking sound pulsed in his ears. He spent the midnight hours poring over the Hendershot journal again, a flickering gas lamp casting long, nervous shadows across the kitchen table. The previous owner, a Mrs. Hendershot, chronicled not events, but emotions. October 29th. Harlan's son John looks at me like I am fire. I caught him measuring the dimensions of the fireplace. He thinks I found the will and hid it. The house hears his thoughts. I hear them too. He keeps asking about the back partition in the pantry. He says his father used to sit there, staring at the wall. The back partition in the pantry. That was the exact spot where Elias had found the journal. A logical place for a desperate man to hide a valuable document. The next morning, under the pretense of insulating the house against the deepening freeze, Elias began his work. He told Martha he was starting in the pantry, a room she rarely entered. He moved with the nervous energy of a thief in his own home. He wanted to solve the mystery of the house before his own family dissolved into the same corrosive suspicion that had destroyed the Hendershots. He scraped away the old flaking wallpaper near the floorboard in the pantry recess. The wood underneath was slightly darker, thicker. When he pressed on it, the entire section gave way with a soft, dusty clunk. It wasn't a hidden safe or a grand treasure chest. It was a shallow, narrow space between two studs. His heart pounding, Elias reached into the void. His fingers closed, not on parchment, but on a thick, heavy object wrapped tightly in oilcloth. He pulled it out. A tarnished silver watch, its casing deeply scratched, stopped precisely at 3:15. It was the source of the persistent ticking, the low, almost inaudible metallic sound of its internal mechanism slowly winding down, amplified by the hollow space of the wall. Beside the watch was a small, tightly folded piece of paper, brittle and yellowed. Elias carefully unfolded the paper. It was not a will, but a handwritten confession signed by the previous owner, John Hendershot, and dated the day after the last journal entry. I cannot endure this suspicion any longer. My father never trusted me. He left his fortune to my stepsister Mary because she showed him kindness in his last weeks. I know she has the will. I watched her hide it in the foundation of the garden shed. But she knows I know, and now she is trying to drive me mad with her tricks. The cold, the moving objects. It is her trying to make me seem unstable so that she can claim her inheritance. She is using the house as her weapon. I am leaving this cursed place before I do something I cannot take back. I took Father's watch as a final memory. The will is in the shed foundation. She wins. Elias read the note twice, the silence of the pantry suddenly feeling dense and oppressive. The truth was far more terrifying than any ghost. The house had been the site of a deliberate campaign of psychological terror. Mary Hendershot, seeking to claim her inheritance and fearing her brother, had been actively manipulating the house, creating drafts, moving objects, exploiting its natural creaks and chills to make her brother believe he was losing his mind. And it had worked. John had fled, abandoning his claim. The question remained, why had Mary also vanished? And why was the terror now being turned on the Smurls? Elias quickly pocketed the watch and the confession. He replaced the loose panel, his mind racing. He had to check the garden shed even in the freezing cold. If the will was there, he could turn it over to the county, settle the Hendershot claim, and logically, the psychological residue in the house would abate. He stepped out of the pantry and nearly collided with Abigail. She was standing in the hall, her arms crossed, looking not at him, but at the scratch mark Martha had shown him on the kitchen table. "Pa," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "It wasn't the mice, and it wasn't Ma. I saw it." Elias froze. "Saw what, honey?" "The shadow. Last night when you were reading in the kitchen. It wasn't tall, like Thomas said. It was hunched. I saw it through the parlor door. It went to the kitchen table, and I swear I heard a scraping sound. I didn't want to tell you because I thought I was dreaming. But the mark is there, Pa. It was a person. Someone in the house." Abigail's eyes, usually clear and trusting, were wide with fear. She didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in something far more immediate and human, an intruder. Elias felt a surge of cold terror that surpassed any phantom fear, a lingering conflict, a physical intruder, and a campaign of psychological manipulation. The house was not haunting them. The house was being used. "It was a trick of the shadow, Abby," Elias managed, his voice sounding hollow even to his own ears. The lamp was flickering. "I'm going outside now to check the shed roof, see if the storm damaged it." He went out quickly, pulling his heavy coat around him. The air was frigid and heavy with the promise of more snow. He headed straight for the small, dilapidated garden shed in the back of the property. The shed floor was packed dirt. He found a rusty old shovel and began to dig near the stone foundation. The dirt was icy hard, but the Hendershot note was clear. The will is in the shed foundation. After 20 minutes of painful, back-breaking work, the shovel struck something solid. It wasn't stone. It was a wooden box. Elias pulled the small, rotting chest out. Inside, wrapped in thick canvas, was a sheaf of legal papers, water-stained but mostly intact. The last will and testament of Harlan Hendershot. As he held the document, Elias felt an immense relief. He had found the physical source of the house's despair. He had found the truth. But beneath the will, nestled in the damp wood chips, was another object, a delicate silver locket. It was the same one Abigail had been constantly losing and finding. A locket Elias knew belonged to Martha. Elias stared at the locket, his blood turning to ice. Martha's locket was always kept in her small box. Why was it here, hidden in a dead man's box in the frozen ground? And why did the confession from John Hendershot talk about Mary moving objects and playing tricks? He stood up, clutching the will and the locket, realizing the terrifying, simple truth. The Smurls were not the victims of the Hendershot family. They were the victims of one of their own. One of them was continuing the psychological campaign, using the house's reputation to terrorize the others. He thought of Martha's tired eyes, Thomas's shadow on the mirror, Abigail's scattering books. He thought of his own lie about the property agent. The paranoia had taken root. He had to get back inside and confront the source of the malice. But as he turned, he saw a dark shape standing by the back porch of the house, watching him. It was too far away to make out details, but the figure was tall and still. It was wearing Elias's own heavy dark coat. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, muffled drumbeat in the silent, cold air. The figure by the porch was unmoving, a dark silhouette against the deepening twilight. The coat was undeniably his. A distinctive, long wool garment he had left hanging in the mudroom. He dropped the shovel and started running, the will and the locket clutched in his left hand. The ground was slick, and the cold burned in his lungs. By the time he reached the porch, the figure was gone. The back door was unlocked. Elias burst into the mudroom. The coat was hanging back on its peg, seemingly undisturbed. He spun around, searching the kitchen, the hall, the parlor. Empty. He found Martha in the dining room, setting the table for dinner, her back to him. She was humming a quiet hymn, a sign she was trying to calm her nerves. "Martha," he exclaimed, his voice rough with adrenaline. "Did you see anyone outside, just now? A tall figure in my coat?" Martha turned, her expression one of tired confusion. "No, Elias. I've been here for the last hour. Are you all right? You're shaking. And why are you holding my locket?" Elias stared at the silver locket in his hand, then at Martha's neck. She was wearing a different, smaller pendant. "This one," he said, holding up the artifact from the shed. "It's yours, isn't it? The one you wear for church." Martha's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock passing over her face. "My silver locket. It was stolen, Elias. I thought I lost it months ago, before we moved here. I haven't seen it since harvest." "It wasn't stolen," Elias stated, stepping closer, his voice low and firm. "I found it, hidden in a box with the Hendershot will, buried beneath the shed foundation." He laid the water-stained will and the locket on the dining table. Then slowly he pulled out the small, brittle confession note. He didn't accuse. He only presented the facts, his voice carefully neutral. "The Hendershot family was destroyed by psychological tricks," he explained, pointing to the note. "A daughter-in-law, Mary, was moving objects, just like Abigail's books, to make her brother-in-law, John, seem insane so she could claim the inheritance. John fled, believing the house was cursed. He wrote this: 'But why was your locket, a thing you lost before we arrived, buried with the evidence of their conflict?'" Martha stepped back, her hands flying to her mouth. She didn't look guilty. She looked horrified. "I didn't lose it before we moved," she whispered. "I lied, Elias. I said I lost it, but I didn't. I put it in the box myself." Elias felt the floor drop out from under him. "You what?" "The house is strange, Elias, and I needed an explanation for myself," Martha admitted, her eyes filling with tears. "After Thomas saw the shadow and the perpetual cold started, I remembered the local gossips mentioning the Hendershots. They said the house took things. So, I hid my favorite locket in that box, deep in the storage shed, just to see if the house would bring it back." A wave of crushing relief mixed with profound disappointment washed over Elias. Her act was born of fear, not malice. She was trying to test the house's supposed spirit and find comfort in a simple, superstitious explanation, a way to reclaim control. You risked everything on a superstition, Martha. You risked the children's sanity. I risked my own, Elias. And you were gone all yesterday, lying about a property agent, and you come back talking about wills and confessions. You're telling me about paranoia, but you're acting like a detective searching for gold. The house is making us mad, Elias. It's making us doubt each other. They stood there, the Hendershot will lying between them, the physical evidence of the previous family's destruction serving as a mirror for their own budding distrust. The truth of the matter was that both of them had been hiding things out of a desperate individual need to solve the house's mystery. I went to a spiritualist, Martha, Elias confessed tiredly. She told me the Hendershots vanished because of this will, not a ghost. She warned me that the house is steeped in human suspicion. I was trying to solve the problem before it broke us too. He told her about the journal, about the cold rooms, and about Abigail seeing a human shape scraping the table. He didn't mention the figure in his coat, not yet. He needed to think about that. We have to stop this, Martha said firmly, wiping her tears. We have to be honest. The house is old, cold and quiet, and someone used it to destroy a family. And someone is still using it to frighten us. It's not a ghost, Elias. It's a person. Abigail saw a person at the table, Elias agreed, his mind turning to the figure in the coat. A hunched figure, but who? The Hendershots left decades ago. A squatter, a neighbor. Thomas, Martha gasped. He saw the shadow move in the mirror. He said it was tall, and Abigail said it was hunched. A tall person who hunches over to avoid being seen. The description was a cold echo of the figure Elias had seen on the porch, tall, covered in his large coat. We have to find out who this intruder is, Elias said, taking Martha's hand. We stop the tests, the lies, the secrets. We focus on the children, and we find out who is squatting here, or who is using the house to drive us out. Suddenly, Thomas appeared at the doorway, his eyes fixed on the will and the locket on the table. Papa, Thomas said, his voice small. I heard a noise just now, a scraping noise, from the chimney flue in the parlor. It sounds like someone is trying to climb down. Elias and Martha exchanged a look of shared, sudden terror. The house was closed, locked down for the night. The chimney, old and large, was the only way into the parlor, the coldest room in the house, the room where the ticking was coming from. Elias grabbed the heavy brass poker from the fireplace hearth. Martha, take the children upstairs and lock the door. Do not open it for anything. I'm going to the parlor. No, Elias, don't go alone. I have to. If it's a squatter, they're cornered. If it's the person who made the mark on the table, I need to know why. He rushed toward the parlor. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, the gas lamp from the hallway casting his shadow, massive and distorted across the parlor's perpetually chilly walls. The room was still and empty. The chimney was dark. Elias approached the hearth slowly, the poker gripped tightly. Then he saw it. The hearth, recently swept clean, was covered in a fresh dusting of soot that had fallen from the chimney. And in the center of the soot, a small, perfect circle had been drawn. And inside the circle, scrawled into the soft dust with a fingertip, was a single, cryptic word. Why? Elias stared at the soot-drawn word in the parlor hearth. Why? It was a silent, accusatory question, directed at him, at his family, at the very act of occupying this house. He looked up the dark, cavernous chimney flue, a cold rush of air confirming that the cap was either damaged or deliberately removed. He didn't need to check. Someone had been in the house and they had just escaped up the chimney. He rushed back to the dining room, his mind struggling to reconcile the fear of a squatter with the unsettling, deliberate nature of the message. A squatter would want to steal, not to ask philosophical questions. It's gone, Elias reported, his voice low and tight. They came in through the chimney. They left a message in the soot. Martha, who had returned from locking the children in their room, was pale but composed. What did it say? It only said, "Why?" Martha's brow furrowed. Why? Why us? Why the house? Or why did the Hendershots vanish? It's a trick, Elias. This person wants us to think about the mystery, to lose sleep, to keep us distracted. Distracted from what? Elias asked, running his hand through his hair. The will? It's here. I have it. I need to take it to the county seat tomorrow. Legally, the problem is solved. The house's value is no longer a secret. He held up the will. It was the only tangible piece of the Hendershot mystery. If the intruder was connected to the Hendershots, the will was the key. Suddenly a loud, grating rumble came from the floorboards below. It was not a squeak or a creak. It was the heavy, rhythmic sound of something large being dragged across the dirt floor of the cellar. Elias grabbed the lantern and the poker. "Stay here, Martha. This is a person. They can't escape the cellar. The only door is through the kitchen." He moved quickly, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. The cellar was an unfinished space, accessible by a trapdoor in the kitchen. He threw open the door, holding the lantern high. The beam cut through the thick, earthy darkness. The air was cold and damp, smelling of old roots and churned soil. The dragging sound stopped instantly. "Who's down there?" Elias yelled. "Show yourself now! I have this poker, and I will use it!" Silence. The only sound was the drip of water from a broken pipe and Elias's own ragged breathing. He descended the wooden steps slowly, the lantern light revealing only earthen walls and the deep shadows of the foundation stones. He reached the bottom and walked across the damp dirt floor. He saw a long, fresh furrow in the dirt, leading from the foundation wall to the center of the room. At the end of the furrow was a small metal shovel, left carelessly on the ground. The intruder had been digging. Elias walked to the foundation wall. There, hidden beneath a loose pile of stones and mortar, was a freshly uncovered cavity. He shone the lamp into the gap. Inside the cavity was a single, large object, an ornate, wooden music box. Elias reached in and pulled it out. It was heavy and cold. As he turned it over, his thumb accidentally triggered the latch. The lid flew open with a small, sharp click. A brittle, tinny tune began to play, a cheerful, slightly discordant waltz. But the most horrifying thing was what was inside the box, nestled against the red velvet lining. 3 small, wax effigies. They were crude, hand-sculpted figures, dressed in scraps of old fabric, tiny, disturbing dolls. Elias recognized them instantly. They were his family. One was a tall man in rough clothes, himself. Another was a woman with a shawl, Martha. The third was a small, slight figure with dark hair, Abigail. The music box played its cheerful, unnerving tune as Elias stared at the wax dolls. This was not the work of a squatter or a financial heir. This was an act of intimate, personalized psychological terror. The intruder was living with them, studying them, and using them as the center of their chilling game. As the music box clicked to an end, a small handwritten note fluttered from the compartment and landed on the dirt floor. Elias picked it up. The handwriting was careful, almost elegant, and utterly mad. The note simply said, "The Hendershots had a 4th. Where did he go?" The realization hit Elias like a blow. The intruder wasn't trying to scare them away. They were trying to tell them a story. The true story of the Hendershot family's demise, using their own family as actors. He looked back at the fresh dirt furrow. The intruder had only just left. He had caught them in the act of digging. The only way out of the cellar was the trapdoor, but Elias had been standing directly in front of it. He swung the lantern wildly around the cellar. There was only one other exit, a small, dark opening in the corner of the foundation, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. It led directly into the crawl space beneath the house. Elias ran up the stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut and jamming the poker underneath the handle. "Martha, call Abigail and Thomas. We're leaving the house." Martha met him in the kitchen, her face a mask of terror. "What is it, Elias? What did you find?" He showed her the music box and the 3 effigies. He didn't show her the note, not yet. He couldn't risk her breaking down. "The person is still here. They're moving under the house, in the crawl space. They are targeting us. They know the house, Martha. They know our family. We need to go to the sheriff's office in Oskaloosa now." He grabbed his coat, the one he thought he saw the intruder wearing, and pulled it on. Suddenly a high-pitched, thin shriek cut through the silence. It came from upstairs. Abigail. Elias and Martha rushed up the stairs. The door to the children's room was locked, just as Martha had left it. Elias hammered on the door. "Abigail, Thomas, open the door." "Pa, I can't." Abigail sobbed from within. "The chest. It's blocking the door. I can't move it." The massive, iron-bound steamer trunk, filled with winter blankets and heavy woolen clothes, had been dragged from the wall and jammed against the door, sealing the children inside. The force required to move it would have been immense, far beyond the strength of Abigail or Thomas, and yet they were trapped. Elias threw his shoulder against the door. Once, twice. The door frame cracked with a sickening sound, but the trunk held firm. Martha screamed, "The window! Abigail, open the window!" "Try to flag down a carriage." "I can't," Abigail wailed. "It's painted shut, Ma. I can't budge it." Elias leaned against the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The intruder was not an heir or a squatter. They were a calculated, terrifying predator who was actively imprisoning his children. "Elias," Martha whispered, pointing to the keyhole. "Look." A small, thin thread of smoke was curling from the keyhole. Someone was trying to smoke them out. The cold, quiet house had just become a deadly trap. The sight of the thin wisp of smoke curling from the keyhole galvanized Elias into brutal action. This was no longer a mystery or a psychological game. It was an attempted murder. "Get back, Martha!" he roared. He slammed his shoulder against the door one last, desperate time. The frame splintered and groaned, but the heavy trunk only shifted an inch. He ran to the landing table, grabbed the heaviest thing he could find, a bronze decorative lamp base, and returned to the door. "Abigail, get away from the door." He began smashing the lamp base into the section of the door panel closest to the hinges, ignoring the frantic screams of his children within and Martha's terrified pleas. The wood cracked and split, the noise deafening in the otherwise silent house. The smoke was thicker now, acrid, smelling of burning coal and oil-soaked rags, a deliberate, hasty attempt to generate toxic fumes. Finally, the panel shattered. Elias reached through the jagged opening, pushing the remaining shards aside. He could see Thomas, huddled and weeping, and Abigail, her face streaked with tears and soot, desperately trying to pull the trunk away. "The hinges!" Elias yelled. "Martha, find me something to pry the hinges." Martha, miraculously calm, ran downstairs and returned a moment later with a flat, sturdy fire iron. Elias jammed the iron into the top hinge, grunting with effort, trying to leverage the door away from the trunk. As he worked, Abigail looked down at the floor by the door and then gasped, pointing through the broken panel. "Pa, the trunk, it's not the trunk." Elias paused, looking where she pointed. The heavy steamer trunk was indeed jammed against the door, but it wasn't the sole barrier. A thin black chain, the kind used to tether farm equipment, was looped around the door handles, front and back, pulled taut and secured with a heavy-duty padlock. The trunk was simply camouflage. The children were not strong enough to break the chain. "The chain, Elias, you have to break the chain," Martha cried, realizing the futility of their current effort. Elias stared at the thick, black iron. He couldn't break it with the lamp base, and he couldn't get a good angle with the fire iron. He needed the axe. "I need the axe!" Elias yelled to Martha. "It's in the kitchen, hurry!" Martha rushed down the stairs. Elias continued to pry and pull, trying to buy time, the smoke now billowing into the hallway. Below, The loud, rapid sound of a heavy weight crashing onto the floor echoed from the kitchen. It was not the sound of a falling axe. It was the sound of a body hitting the floor. "Martha!" Elias screamed, fear and adrenaline spiking into sheer panic. No reply. Only silence. "Martha!" Elias pulled out the fire iron and, without thinking, hurled himself down the stairs. He burst into the kitchen, his lungs already burning from the smoke. Martha was on the floor, unconscious, a dark, growing bruise mottling her temple. Standing over her was a figure, tall and hunched, just as Abigail had described, cloaked in Elias's stolen coat. The figure held Elias's heavy farm axe. The intruder was not a stranger. The height, the broad shoulders, the way the coat hung. It could only be a man who knew the house intimately. Elias stopped dead. The only sound the crackle of fire starting upstairs and the faint, discordant ticking that seemed to follow him everywhere. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, his voice trembling but steady. "What do you want?" The figure did not move, did not speak. It simply stood over Martha, the axe held loosely at its side, its head tilted in what Elias could only interpret as an unsettling curiosity. The why in the soot, Elias pressed, trying to buy time. The music box, the will. You're asking for the story. What is the real story of the Hendershots? Tell me, and I'll leave you alone. The figure slowly raised the axe, not to strike, but to point. The axe head pointed directly at the trapdoor leading to the cellar. Then slowly, the figure pointed at Martha on the floor. Elias understood the unspoken command. Go to the cellar. He knew this was a trap. But Martha was hurt, and the children were being burned alive upstairs. You go first, Elias challenged, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. You want me in the cellar? Then you lead. The figure didn't hesitate. It turned and, with an odd stiff gait, lifted the trapdoor. It dropped the axe onto the kitchen floor, a deliberate sign of disarmament or a taunt, and slipped down into the darkness, disappearing quickly into the cellar's blackness. Elias ran to Martha, checking her pulse. Slow but steady. She was only stunned. He had seconds. He grabbed the axe. The smoke was thick and bitter, making his eyes tear. He lunged back up the stairs. The fire was growing, an ominous orange glow now visible through the broken door panel. He brought the axe down, a desperate final swing, directly onto the heavy padlock. The sound of the blow was like a gunshot. The lock shattered, the chain went slack, and the steamer trunk, no longer constrained, shifted. Elias threw his weight against the door, and it burst open. Abigail screamed and ran into his arms. Thomas was huddled beneath the window. The room was choking with smoke. "We have to go! Now! Down the back stairs!" He grabbed Thomas, Martha's locket falling from his coat pocket and landing unnoticed on the smoky floor. He pushed Abigail ahead of him. As they raced down the back staircase, they passed the guest bedroom. From the guest bedroom, a new sound emerged. Laughter. Not the manic cackle of a madman, but quiet, cold, rational laughter. Elias paused on the landing, his protective instincts warring with his terror. He pushed the children down the remaining steps, telling them to wait outside by the shed. He turned back. The guest bedroom door was open. Elias pushed it wider, the smoke swirling around him. The room was completely empty, yet the faint, chilling laughter continued, seeming to emanate from the floorboards near the bed. He noticed the floorboards here were newer, recently installed. He dropped the axe and frantically pulled at the loose wood. The boards lifted easily, revealing a small duct leading into the crawl space, the same crawl space the intruder had escaped into from the cellar. The laughter was coming from the duct. The intruder had not gone to the cellar. They had used the ducts to move silently through the house, and now they were beneath the floor, mocking him. Elias dropped to his knees, peering into the dark, dusty hole. The smoke was pouring in from the chimney flue, filling the crawl space. I know you're down there." Elias yelled into the void, his voice rough with smoke and rage. "You used the Hendershot story to destroy a family, and you're trying to destroy mine. Show yourself." The laughter stopped. A moment of chilling silence. Then a low, guttural voice, heavily distorted by the acoustics of the ductwork, spoke a single measured phrase. "The Hendershots had 4. Elias scrambled back, his mind racing to the note he had found in the music box. The Hendershots had a 4th. Where did he go? The intruder was not one of the original Hendershots. The intruder was the 4th person, the hidden one. But who was he? The heat from the upstairs fire was now intense, and Elias could hear the terrifying sound of the ceiling crackling. He had to save Martha. He ran back to the kitchen, grabbed Martha, and dragged her heavy, inert body out the back door, past the mudroom. The children were waiting huddled by the shed. As he reached them, the front upstairs window burst outward in a shower of glass and flame. They stood in the freezing Iowa night, watching their home burn, the orange flames casting long, flickering shadows across the snow. The house was not merely burning, it was destroying the evidence. Elias held his family tight, but the victory felt hollow. He had saved their lives, but the culprit, the 4th Hendershot, had escaped into the maze of the crawl space, taking the truth with him. The flames consumed the old farmhouse with horrifying speed, illuminating the entire frozen prairie. By the time the neighbors and the local fire wagon arrived, drawn by the stark, unnatural light, only the stone foundation and the smoldering skeleton of the house remained. Elias, Martha, now revived and heavily leaning on him, Abigail and Thomas were taken in by the kind, if nervous, family of their closest neighbor, Mr. Harrison. They were safe, but utterly ruined. The next morning, the local sheriff, a tall, pragmatic man named Sheriff Dale, conducted his inquiry. "There's no natural explanation for that fire, Smurl," Sheriff Dale said, standing in the cold, charred remnants of the kitchen. "The fire started in the upstairs parlor, but the accelerant used smells like coal oil. And the trunk blocking the children's door? That's not accidental." Elias held nothing back. He gave the sheriff the Hendershot will, the confession note, the music box with the effigies, and the note about the 4th Hendershot. He described the intruder, the tall, hunched figure, the stolen coat, the scraping noise, the crawl space, and the voice in the duct. Sheriff Dale listened patiently, his face growing grimmer with each detail. "The Hendershots," the sheriff mused. "Yes, I remember the case from when I was a boy. They didn't just vanish, Smurl. They left behind a tremendous amount of debt and a lot of bad blood in the community. Harlan Hendershot, the patriarch, was a cruel, vindictive man, prone to elaborate pranks. He once faked his own death just to see who cried at his funeral. So the psychological terror. It runs in the family," Elias said, nodding grimly. "It does. But the 4th, that's the missing piece. Harlan Hendershot had 3 children who lived to adulthood. John, the son who wrote the confession, Mary, the daughter-in-law he left the will to, and another son, Andrew. But Andrew was considered unfit. He was mute and had some severe psychological troubles. Harlan locked him away in a small room on the 2nd floor, a sort of family secret. They called it the Sun Room." Elias and Martha exchanged a horrified look. The Sun Room. It was the room directly above the back pantry, connected to the chimney flue and the crawl space. It was the room that was always the coldest, the room that resisted heat. When the Hendershots left, Sheriff Dale continued, they told everyone Andrew had been placed in an asylum, but no records of him ever appeared. The rumor was that Harlan's wife, tired of the embarrassment and the expense, simply locked Andrew in the sunroom and left him to starve, pretending she was bringing him food. Elias's blood ran cold. The 4th Hendershot was not a financial heir, but a displaced, mentally disabled man, trapped in the house decades ago, possibly until his death. The intruder's question, The Hendershots had a fourth. Where did he go? Was an accusation directed at the house itself, or perhaps a desperate plea for recognition? Andrew Hendershot, Elias whispered. The man who never left the house. The one who had to watch his family turn on each other over the will. If he died in that house, Martha added, staring at the chimney's remains, then the house was haunted. Not by a ghost, but by the physical residue of his confinement and his fear. The cold, the scraping noises, they were Andrew trying to get out. Or, the sheriff said, looking at the charred ruin of the sunroom, Andrew Hendershot did not die. He was mute, but highly intelligent. He was known for his ability to squeeze into small spaces and his uncanny strength. If he was released, he would know the house better than anyone. He could have survived in the crawl space for decades, sustained by periodic foraging. The mute, psychologically damaged son, forced to watch his family destroy itself, now driven to terrorize the new occupants. He had used the chimney, the crawl space, the hidden ducts. He was the hunched figure, moving only at night, hiding in Elias's coat, the master of the house's silent, cold spaces. He asked why. Elias said, recalling the soot message. He wanted to know why the cycle was repeating itself, why another family was destroying itself over the house. And now he's gone. Sheriff Dale concluded. He's not under the rubble. We've checked the foundation. He either fled the property, or he's hidden somewhere nearby, waiting. Elias realized the true horror. They had defeated the house, but they had not defeated Andrew Hendershot. He was out there, free in the Iowa winter, the mute, vengeful, and profoundly cunning survivor of the first family's malice. As the sheriff left to coordinate the search, Martha found Elias kneeling by the charred mudroom steps. "Elias," she said softly, touching his smoke-stained shoulder. "We have nothing left, but we have each other and the children. We have to be strong now." Elias nodded, but his eyes were fixed on a small, dark object, poking out from the ashes where the mudroom floor had been. He reached in, his fingers closing around the cold metal. It was a key, a heavy, old-fashioned, ornate key. It was too large for a standard door lock, too small for a padlock. It looked like the key to a trunk. Martha saw it. "What is it?" "A key," Elias said, his voice flat. "It fell out of the intruder's coat, or maybe it was on the floor when I dragged you out. It's the only thing they left behind." Elias looked around the smoking ruins. There was no trunk to be found. But the Hendershots were wealthy, and Harlan Hendershot was famously paranoid. Harlan Hendershot didn't just hide a will, Elias realized. He hid his wealth. Andrew, watching his family fight over a worthless piece of paper, must have known that the real treasure was hidden somewhere else. The search for the will had been a decoy. The entire Hendershot drama was a distraction from the true secret of the house, a hidden fortune. And the intruder, Andrew, had been digging for it in the cellar. The frantic dragging sound they had heard. The music box was a taunt. The key was the clue. Elias clutched the key, feeling the cold, hard metal. He hadn't stopped the cycle. He had just inherited the obsession. "We have to go back to town, Elias," Martha urged, pulling him up. "Leave the key. Leave the house. It's done." Elias looked at the key, then at the vast, desolate landscape of the burnt farm. The will was public. Andrew was free. The real treasure was still hidden. He knew he couldn't leave. "No, Martha," Elias said, his eyes filled with a new, dangerous resolve. Andrew Hendershot didn't burn the house down to escape. He burned it down to clear the ground. We have to find out where he went, and we have to find what this key unlocks. Elias and his family were officially relocated to a small rented room in Oskaloosa. The children, still reeling from the trauma, were quiet and clung to Martha. Martha was determined to sever all ties with the Hendershot property, but Elias was trapped, not by fear, but by the cold, heavy realization that the key and the hidden fortune were now his responsibility. He saw his pursuit not as greed, but as a final act of justice. If he found the Hendershot fortune, he could turn it over to the state, settle the remaining debts, and erase the lingering curse of avarice that had destroyed two families. More importantly, he needed to find Andrew Hendershot before Andrew found them. Elias spent the next few days in the county library, poring over old blueprints and property surveys of the Hendershot farm. The will and the confession provided the emotional context, but the key demanded a physical location. He discovered that the farm once included an auxiliary structure, long since torn down, an old smokehouse located roughly 50 yards behind the garden shed, near the property line. It wasn't on the modern maps, but it was detailed in a survey from 1875. Elias thought back to the cellar. Andrew Hendershot had been digging in the center of the room, near the foundation. He had been looking for something large. The small metal shovel left behind confirmed his intent. The key was thick and old, clearly built for a heavy chest or a secure room. Elias presented his theory to Sheriff Dale. The fire cleared the land. Andrew Hendershot burned the house down to expose the outdoor features. He didn't want us interfering with his final search. The fortune is outside the house, possibly beneath the old smokehouse foundation. Sheriff Dale, weary but intrigued, agreed to accompany Elias. We'll call it evidence recovery, Smurl, but you touch nothing. If this Hendershot is still out there, he'll be watching the ruins. They returned to the burnt farm. The scene was desolate, the air still thick with the smell of wet ashes. Elias led the sheriff 50 paces behind the shed. The ground here was uneven, covered in frozen grass, but Elias felt a slight, distinct rise in the terrain. The smokehouse, Elias muttered, dropping to his knees. He began scraping away the dirt and frozen weeds with a gloved hand. He found a line of old, fire-cracked bricks, the remnants of the smokehouse foundation. The sheriff found a heavy crowbar in the remains of the shed. They began prying up the stones. After an hour of grueling work in the biting cold, they exposed a rectangular patch of earth that was softer, newer. Someone dug here recently, Sheriff Dale confirmed, his breath misting in the air. It's been disturbed. They dug deeper, the shovels crunching through the dirt. A foot down, they hit something solid. They cleared the earth and uncovered the top of a heavy metal safe box, roughly the size of a small steamer trunk. It was pitted with rust, but the locking mechanism was intact. Elias took out the ornate key. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. This was the moment of truth. He inserted the key into the heavy lock. It turned with a resounding metallic clunk. Sheriff Dale used the crowbar to pry the heavy lid open. The contents of the box were not glittering gold or stacks of cash. It contained dozens of carefully wrapped documents, thick legal paper bound with string. Elias lifted a bundle. They were deeds to land, mortgages, and stock certificates, all belonging to Harlan Hendershot, all dated just before his supposed death. It was a fortune in real estate and investments, not cash. It's not liquid wealth, Smurl, the sheriff said, sounding disappointed. It's assets. He was hiding his true worth from the tax man and his feuding family. Elias saw the bigger picture. The will was a decoy. Harlan had buried the key to his family's destruction. Beneath the documents, nestled in a layer of old felt, was one last object, a small sealed glass vial. Inside the vial was a brown, flaky powder. "What is this?" Elias asked, holding the vial up to the light. Sheriff Dale looked at it, then his face went pale. "I've seen this before, in the county laboratory. It's crushed nightshade, a highly toxic poison. Harlan Hendershot was a paranoid man. He didn't trust banks or people. He kept his exit strategy ready." Elias felt sick. The Hendershot family hadn't been destroyed by ghosts or paranoia alone. They had been destroyed by poison. The Hendershots had a fourth. Where did he go? Elias remembered the chilling note. Andrew was the only one who could have known about the hidden poison, the final, desperate weapon Harlan kept. As they stood there, the reality of the situation came crashing down. The Hendershots didn't vanish. The will led to the location of the poison, and the key was what unlocked the truth. Suddenly, a shot rang out. The bullet struck the metal safe box with a loud ping. The glass vial in Elias's hand shattered, and the brown powder dusted his gloves and the ground. "Get down!" Sheriff Dale yelled, drawing his pistol. They dove behind the large stone foundation of the old house. The air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. "He's over there, in the tree line!" Sheriff Dale shouted. "Smurl, stay down!" Elias peeked over the top of the foundation. He saw a figure hunched and shrouded in a dark coat, Andrew Hendershot, retreating quickly into the thick stand of barren trees on the far property line, a small, dark rifle clutched in his hands. Andrew wasn't trying to shoot them. He was trying to destroy the evidence. He shot the box to hit the vial. He knew the wealth was irrelevant now. The poison was the secret. Elias realized Andrew hadn't been hiding in the crawl space for decades. He had been waiting for someone to find the will and, inevitably, find the key and the poison. Andrew had stayed behind to be the final witness to his father's final, venomous secret. He got away, Sheriff Dale said, his face grim, holstering his weapon. "He's fast and knows the terrain. He's heading for the railway line. He won't be back here." Elias looked at the shattered vial and the dusting of poison. The mystery was solved. The Hendershots didn't vanish due to a ghost. They were poisoned by the only family member they failed to account for, the mute, observant son who used his father's own poison to enact revenge for a life of cruelty and neglect. He had stayed in the shadows, watched the Smurls, and then destroyed the house to conceal the poison. The case was closed. The wealth was recovered. Andrew Hendershot was now a fugitive. Elias looked down at his gloved hand, still covered in the fine brown powder. He felt a sudden, profound exhaustion. He was done with this house. But as they walked back, Elias noticed something strange about the sheriff. Sheriff Dale's usual composed demeanor was replaced by a slight, almost imperceptible twitch in his left eye. He was constantly rubbing the back of his neck, and his words were becoming clipped, impatient. "We have the evidence, Smurl. We're done. No need to mention the poison to anyone. It's better if this stays between us." The sheriff's voice was suddenly cold, dismissive. Elias looked at the sheriff's hand. He was not wearing gloves. He had been handling the documents and the shattered vial without protection. The nightshade was volatile. The air around the smokehouse had been filled with its dust. The sheriff had been poisoned. And as a victim of the poison, his symptoms would include paranoia, anxiety, and extreme suspicion, the exact psychological conditions that had destroyed the Hendershot family. Elias felt a new, ice-cold dread. The Hendershot curse was not physical, but chemical. Andrew Hendershot had not just fled. He had deliberately infected the man who was supposed to solve the case. The cycle had not ended. It had just found its next victim. Elias returned to Oskaloosa, shaken but trying to appear calm. He told Martha only that they had found the wealth and that the case was closed. He didn't mention the poison or the fugitive Andrew Hendershot. He couldn't risk frightening her, nor could he risk the paranoia spreading to his own family again. But the seed of suspicion had already been planted. The way Sheriff Dale had snapped at him, the nervous tick, the insistence on keeping the poison a secret, it all echoed the corrosive, secretive behavior of the Hendershots. Elias spent the evening researching nightshade poisoning in the limited medical texts he could access. The symptoms were clear: delirium, paranoia, violent mood swings, and hallucinations, the very things that had driven the Hendershots apart. The poison didn't kill immediately. It drove the victim to self-destruction and madness first. The next day, Elias went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dale was sitting at his desk, but he was unrecognizable. His uniform was rumpled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes darted nervously around the room, settling for moments on the shadows in the corners. "Smurl," the sheriff said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "Why are you here? You've been following me, haven't you?" "I just wanted to check on the Hendershot assets, Sheriff," Elias said, his voice calm and steady. "Assets? They're worthless. They're fakes. Harlan Hendershot was a trickster. You know that. And you're trying to steal them before I can burn them." The sheriff slammed his fist on the desk. "No, Sheriff. They're real. We found them. You're lying. I saw you near the train depot last night. You met with Andrew Hendershot. You're working with him. You want to share the fake fortune and pin the fire on me." Elias realized the poison was working fast. The sheriff, the symbol of law and order, was dissolving into full-blown paranoia. He was turning into a Hendershot. "Sheriff," Elias said, leaning closer, trying to lower his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "We both inhaled that dust. It was poison. Nightshade. We need to go to a doctor." Sheriff Dale's face twisted into a snarl. He reached for his gun but stopped himself, his eyes wide with fear. "You're trying to trick me. You're trying to lure me to a doctor who works for Andrew. The doctor is the fourth person. The note was a lie. You are lying, Smurl. You want me out of the way." Elias backed slowly toward the door. The sheriff, in his paranoid delusion, was a deadly threat. He had to save himself, and more importantly, he had to save Martha and the children from being dragged into the sheriff's madness. "I'm leaving now, Sheriff," Elias said. "I'll see you tomorrow." "You won't," the sheriff yelled, picking up the heavy inkwell from his desk. "I'm locking you up. You're the source of the curse. You are the real Andrew Hendershot." Elias slammed the door shut and ran. The sheriff was now completely broken, his grip on reality severed by the poison. He was already seeing Elias as the perpetrator. When Elias returned to the rented room, he found Martha packing their few remaining possessions into a satchel. "We're leaving, Elias," she said, her voice firm, avoiding his eyes. "What?" "Martha, we just got here. We're safe now." "We're not safe," she said, turning to face him. Her eyes were red, but her expression was one of cold, hard certainty. "I spoke to the local paper boy. He told me the entire story about the Hendershots, about the fire, the will, and how you were found digging with the sheriff. And he mentioned the fourth person. He said the fourth Hendershot was supposedly mute." Elias felt a chill of true terror. "Martha, I can explain that. Andrew was mute, but you are a quiet man, Elias. You are a silent man," Martha interrupted, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "You rarely speak about your past. You never talk about your childhood. I saw the way you looked at that house, Elias, not with fear, but with a terrible recognition." Elias suddenly understood her terrifying logic. She had watched him become obsessed, secretive, and manipulative over the last week. She had seen his descent into paranoia, and the one key piece of information, Andrew Hendershot was mute and secretive, was enough to twist her fear into a terrifying conclusion. "The locket, Elias," Martha continued, her voice breaking. "You said you found it with the will. But I hid it there to test the house. You must have seen me hide it, Elias. You are the only one who could have known where I put it. You are Andrew Hendershot." Elias was stunned into silence. The poison had not only infected the sheriff. The sheer weight of the Hendershot story had infected Martha's mind. She was now projecting the role of the vengeful, secretive son onto her own husband. "Martha, look at me," Elias pleaded, grabbing her shoulders. "I am Elias Smurl. I am your husband. I am Thomas and Abigail's father." "Prove it," she cried, pulling away. "Prove you're not the one who destroyed the Hendershots and is now destroying us. Why did you lie about the agent? Why did you hide the journal? Why did you risk our lives over a dead man's money?" Elias had no defense. Every action he had taken to save the family had been secretive, and therefore, in her poisoned view, proof of his guilt. Suddenly, Abigail ran into the room, her face pale. "Pa, Ma, The sheriff. He's downstairs. He's screaming that you tried to poison him and that you're the mute Hendershot." The cycle was complete. The sheriff, driven mad by Nightshade, was confirming Martha's fears, solidifying her delusion. Elias was now hunted by the law and feared by his wife, all because of the chemical ghost Andrew had left behind. Elias looked at Martha. Her face was a mask of suspicion and terror. He knew he couldn't convince her. He had to protect the children. "I need you to take the children, Martha," Elias commanded, his voice raw. "Leave through the back window and go to the train station. Go to the city. Don't stop. I'll deal with the sheriff." "No," Martha said, her eyes fixed on him with cold, terrifying certainty. "I'm not leaving them with you, Andrew. I'm taking them myself." She grabbed the children and pushed them toward the back window. The children, confused and terrified by the noise downstairs and their parents' fight, simply obeyed their mother. Elias made a choice. He was either the loving father or the desperate fugitive. He let them go. He ran to the door just as Sheriff Dale burst in, pistol drawn, his eyes manic and wide. "I have you now, Andrew Hendershot," the sheriff shrieked. "You won't hide the wealth. You won't poison me. I will stop the cycle." Elias raised his hands. The sounds of Martha, Abigail, and Thomas scrambling out the back window, muffled by the sheriff's psychotic rage. The cycle of the Hendershot family, suspicion, accusation, and destruction, was playing out in the Smurl family's small rented room. "Sheriff Dale," Elias said, his voice flat. "You are ill. The Nightshade is working on your mind. I am Elias Smurl. I am not Andrew Hendershot." "Liar!" the sheriff screamed, aiming the pistol, his hand shaking violently. "You are the silent one, the vengeful one. You burned the house to cover your tracks. You wanted the whole world to think I was mad, just like Harlan Hendershot made his son mad." "Harlan used his own cruelty, Sheriff," Elias countered, desperately trying to appeal to the man he knew. "Andrew used his father's poison. That vial shattered at the smokehouse. You were exposed. Look at your hand, Sheriff. You're shaking. You're seeing shadows." The sheriff's eyes darted to his own trembling hand. A moment of confusion crossed his face, a flicker of the rational man fighting the chemical madness. No, it's you," the sheriff insisted, his voice regaining its venom. "The mute one. The killer. You killed John and Mary and framed their disappearance, and now you'll pay." The sheriff lunged. Elias tackled him, the two men crashing to the floor, the pistol skittering away across the thin rug. Elias was physically stronger, but the sheriff was fighting with the desperate, raw power of a man convinced he was fighting a phantom. They wrestled toward the gun. Elias landed a blow, stunning the sheriff momentarily. He grabbed the pistol, scrambled back, and pointed the barrel at the sheriff's chest. "I am not going to shoot you, Sheriff," Elias said, breathing heavily. "But this ends now. Martha and the children are gone. They are safe. The curse stops with me." The sheriff, however, was past reason. He lunged again, head first, a primal scream tearing from his throat. Elias sidestepped the charge, and the sheriff crashed into the small bedroom window, shattering the glass and falling to the street below with a sickening thud. Elias ran to the broken window, looking down. The sheriff was lying on the cobblestones, unmoving. He had broken his neck. Elias lowered the pistol slowly. He was alone. The house was gone. The sheriff was dead, driven to his end by Harlan Hendershot's final chemical trick. Martha and the children believed he was a fugitive, the mute Hendershot. He had lost his family and his identity. He rushed out of the room and ran toward the train depot. He reached the crowded, noisy depot. Martha, Abigail, and Thomas were already on the platform. Martha saw him immediately, her eyes narrowing, confirming her suspicion. He was the one running from the law, the one she believed to be the killer. Elias ran towards them, shouting over the steam whistle. "Martha, please, listen to me. It was the poison, not me. I am Elias." Martha clutched the children, pulling them behind her, shielding them. "The money is gone, Andrew!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with finality. "The cycle is over. You'll never destroy us." She grabbed the children and boarded the waiting train. The doors slammed shut, and the great engine began to pull away, carrying his family out of his life. Elias stood on the platform watching the back of the train disappear into the cold grey morning. He was now a man without a home, a name, or a family, wanted for the death of a sheriff who was already poisoned. He was the scapegoat for a 40-year-old family's malice. He was officially vanished. As he walked down the empty morning street, the sound of the passing train fading behind him, he heard something new. The faint, tinny, slightly discordant sound of a music box, playing its waltz. It seemed to be coming from an alleyway he was passing. Elias froze, his blood turning to ice. Andrew Hendershot was still out there. He cautiously approached the alley. It was empty, but propped against a stack of empty crates was the ornate wooden music box from the cellar. The lid was open, and the tune was playing. Elias slowly bent down and picked it up. He looked inside. The 3 wax effigies, himself, Martha, and Abigail, were gone. Instead, resting in the red velvet lining, was a new 4th effigy. It was a crude, small wax figure of a mute, hunched man, dressed in a scrap of dark fabric. And beneath the effigy, written on a small, perfect square of paper, were 2 simple, chilling words: "You're free." The music box clicked to a stop. Andrew Hendershot had not been trying to destroy Elias Smurl. He had been trying to free Elias Smurl, to free him from the house, the obsession, and the identity of the family man, allowing him to take on the role of the fugitive, the ghost, the mute witness to the Hendershot curse. Andrew had solved his own problem by giving his torment to the next occupant. Elias Smurl, the honest farmer, had vanished. In his place stood a silent, haunted man, framed for murder, separated from his family, and carrying the burden of a chemical ghost. He was the new Andrew Hendershot. He dropped the music box into the alley, turned, and walked away, disappearing into the cold, anonymous streets of Oskaloosa, becoming one of the nameless men the prairie often swallowed. A man who had simply vanished after the séances began.